All right, so open today to 1 Corinthians 3. And as you're turning there, I want to tell you a much-beloved story with a dreadful twist. And I believe last summer Pastor Troy told the same story, and you know it from the German folklore, but the three little pigs, you know. So you have the first pig, and I'm just going to tell this in my own order, but so you have three pigs, and they decide they're going to go into the construction business. And so as they look around at the materials available, you know, you got to take things into account, like, you know, how much money you have to spend on materials and time and that kind of thing. So they all kind of went their different directions. So the first pig that built, he decided he was going to build with sticks. There we go. So first pig, he decides he's going to build with sticks. So he builds a nice, beautiful little log/stick cabin. And, you know, very quaint, very beautiful, very simple. That's just the way he was. Well, the second guy, he had a little less fun, so maybe he was more stingy. I don't know. He decided he was going to go with hay and straw and things like that. So very cost efficient, very warm in the winter. You know, he really had it made. Well, the third guy, he was a little more of one of these, you know, he was a little more paranoid about things. You know, the government's going to come in and take him over and that kind of thing. So he decided he was going to go with brick, and I interpreted steel. I just imagined him reinforcing it with steel and that kind of thing. So they all went their separate ways. Well, of course, as you know, the big bad wolf came in, and now in German folklore, he came in, and what did he do? He huffed, puffed, and, well, that's not very efficient, is it? So this wolf actually came in with a flamethrower, which is a little more efficient, right? So big bad wolf with a flamethrower. He got the job done. Well, at least 2/3 of the job done. You know, brick house, that would stand up to huffing, puffing, and even flamethrowers. So now there's a reason that I put this ridiculous twist on this, because as we really read in 1 Corinthians 3, it actually does talk about this exact type of scenario. Not the pigs so much, but let's begin reading in chapter 3, in verse 1. But I, brothers, could not address you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as infants in Christ. I fed you with milk, not solid food, for you're not ready, and even now you're not ready, for you are still of the flesh. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another says, well, I follow Apollos, are you not merely human? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid the foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it. For no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Let's pray before we begin. Lord, as we open your word today, this is how you speak to us, Lord. This is how you talk to us. You don't come down in lights through the clouds, though sometimes we'd like that, but Lord, you have given us your word, and you tell us there is everything that we need for life and godliness in this book. And so, Lord, as we look into what you have to say to us today, might we open our hearts, might we open our minds to the things that you would have us to see. In your name, amen. So I think you can see now where the three little pigs plus flamethrower fits a little more into this account here in Scripture. Because Paul is talking about the church. I mean, if you know anything about the book of Corinthians, you know that this was one messed up church. I mean, any church has problems. As long as there are people that have pulses in a church, there are going to be problems. This church had like problems times 10. You know, you read it and it's like, my problems seem kind of minimal compared to that. But one of the big problems, and really the one that Paul starts off with in the book, is the schisms, the division that was in the church. I mean, Paul came to this incredibly ungodly city that was known in the ancient world for its ungodliness. I mean, people in Athens are like, oh, yeah. If you really wanted to insult someone and say you're a little loose, you'd say, oh, you Corinthian. So that would be like, oh, no, he didn't. But that's what they would do, seriously. So Paul came into a sticky situation, brought the gospel. The gospel was changing lives, and yet even at that, this church had some major problems. Because now they're like, oh, man, Paul, he's my man. Another person gets Apollos tattooed on their arm. Another person, and people were, oh, no, I'm Peter. I've got the Peter banner here. And then there were other, more pious ones. Well, I just follow Jesus. But really, it was division. It was, well, I'm with him. And it was fighting and strife in this church. So Paul hits it head on because that kind of thing, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to find out that kind of thing destroys a church body and a church family. So Paul hits it pretty hard. And he comes back to it now in chapter 3. And he's saying, look, me, Apollos, we don't matter. It's sort of like, it's like a farmer. Okay, so a farmer goes out and you can put Miracle-Gro on there and you can do everything right and nothing grows. I mean, you can do everything right and then you've got more than you know what to do with. So what's the factor? Is it the farmer that makes the thing grow, that pulls it up out of the stalk and starts forming the corn? No, that's ridiculous. The farmer waters, the farmer plants, the farmer cares for, but really, God is the one who makes stuff grow. And he's like, you know what? It's the same thing in a church. It's not about who came and who did the watering and, oh, well, he must have had the pH just right in the water because, hey, look at this. No, that doesn't matter. He's like, forget about the men. That's not the point. The point is that God is the one who gives the increase. God's the one who makes things actually happen. So he's bringing them back to that. He says, we're simply farmers in a field. Or, another example he says is like workers on a building. And this is where we start to go into our text today. In verse 10, Paul says that he laid the foundation. In other words, he planted the church. I mean, he was the first guy there to bring the gospel. There was no Jesus Christ being talked about in Corinth. This wasn't there. So Paul just happened to be the first guy that came in and started talking about Jesus. He's saying, look, don't look at me. Don't put me up on a pedestal. It's not like I saved your souls. I just told you about the one who could. He says Jesus Christ is actually the foundation. And now we begin into verse 11. So a couple of thoughts that I just want to kind of clear up before we launch into this. I've heard this text preached a number of different ways and applied a number of different ways. And a lot of times it seemed when I would go to camp as a young kid, and for some reason we always had the really loud preachers that liked to bang and spit on you, and that kind of thing. And they'd come to this one, and it was like, oh man, when you get to heaven, your life's going to be on a movie screen, and everyone's going to see all the terrible stuff that you've done, and it's going to go up in flames, That's kind of where they usually went with this. Not going there. I believe there's a better impacting application to this, though just as challenging. In the context of this, there's strong application actually to our work in God's church. We always seem to apply this to just me, to the stuff that I do in my life, and what God will think of it, and what's going to last and what isn't. But in the context of this, Paul is talking about people who are dividing their own church, people who are having conflict and strife, and he's saying, look guys, it's not about us, it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about God. So let's look at what we are all doing here. And that's kind of how I'd like to apply this today. So as we talk about this, we're thinking of our church as a whole. What is the church? Ephesians 5:25, I think, really helps clarify what the church is, because many people define it in many different ways. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. A simple verse, we've all heard it before. And yet there, the church is, it seems very clear to me, the church is not about a building, it's not an address on a street, it's not even the programs and stuff that we do. The church is people. If there weren't people here, there would be no church. And frankly, that verse even clarifies it further. Christ died for the church. He didn't die for a building. He didn't die for this or that kind of program. He died for people. So as we think church, think people. Look around you if you have to. This is the church, the people that are here. So now let's go right into this and see what it is that God has for us today. So verse 11. Well, let me just back up for a minute and just summarize. Here's what Paul's trying to say. I'm going to kind of give you a roadmap of where we're going. Paul is saying this: build to last, sort of like the third pig, even though he's the most grotesque one that I think. The third guy, he built something that was going to last, whether it was, huffing and puffing or flamethrowers or whatever. He built something that was going to stick around. And that's what Paul is saying here. You build one another up in a way that is going to last. If we're going to picture the church as like a building, then you build it to stick around. So the first part he tells us is to build. And in verse 11, he basically says the foundation is already there. The foundation is Jesus Christ. And it's not even like, well, now make sure you build on the right foundation. He's almost assuming there really is no other foundation to build on. It's sort of like, are you going to build on cement or are you going to build on clay sand? I mean, it's a totally, there's just no question there. It's not either or, it's Jesus Christ or nothing. In two or three different ways, he talks about laying a foundation here. And it's interesting the way that he says this. For no one can lay a foundation other than that which is already laid. Okay, so you kind of hear the word lay there twice. The first one, it's like putting a picture on a shelf. And he's describing us, building a foundation. It's like, or if we were to build a foundation, it would be sort of like just putting a picture on a shelf, right? So then somebody goes stomping around the house, the picture falls off and smashes, right? It's not meant to be up there permanently, just kind of sticking it up there. The second one's more like fastening a picture to a wall. So maybe not even just, having a little hanger, but like you're nailing that sucker to the wall. It's not going anywhere. And that's the way that Jesus Christ's foundation is. So the comparison, there is no comparison. It's all or nothing. We either build on Jesus Christ or we might as well not build at all. So the point is, there is only one foundation, and that is Jesus Christ. So don't waste your time on any other foundation. Don't try to build on anything else. Some churches do try to build on foundations other than Jesus Christ. Maybe it's good works. We just need to be good enough. Maybe it's tradition. So we've always done it this way before, and it drifts away from the true foundation, Jesus Christ. So really, as we look at this, if you don't have the relationship with Jesus Christ, you really don't have anything to build on. I mean, it assumes that. Paul's just assuming that we're talking about the foundation is Jesus Christ. But maybe we shouldn't all assume that. And if we don't have the relationship with Him, then really we don't have a leg to stand on, literally. So you build on Jesus Christ. But we have building options now. As we get into verse 12, we find out there are different ways that people build. So what is I've heard this, what is the whole gold, silver, wood, hay kind of thing? What do each of those mean? Now the gold means this. Silver means that. The hay means, I don't know. And Paul doesn't say, now listen up, listen closely. The gold means whatever. He just doesn't go there. And it doesn't matter. Basically, you have two categories of building materials that he's talking about. It's like the stuff that sticks around and the stuff that doesn't. And that's really it. So you've got the gold and the silver and the precious stones, which I always kind of imagined like sapphires and rubies and that kind of thing, which kind of seemed weird to put into a building. But it could also mean things like marble. I mean, that's a stone that's rare and expensive, but very durable. So whichever way you want to look at it is fine. You get the idea either way. You're building something that can stand just about anything. It's going to stick around. I mean, you go to ancient Greece and you see the stuff that was built out of marble and some of these other kinds of metals and stuff. It's still around. I mean, yeah, it's crumbling a little bit, but it's been around for like thousands of years. And it's amazing, right? So he's kind of picturing that, as opposed to building with stuff that is more affordable. I mean, today we build with a lot of wood and such. but we're not exactly trying to build things that are going to be completely 100% fireproof. I mean, because you don't just plan on having a fire. But he's just comparing building with this stuff here versus this stuff here. This stuff, yeah, it's more affordable by far. It's much easier to go out in the woods, chop down a tree and get some wood, gather sticks together, get some hay together for insulation or whatever, and you can build with that. We are commanded to build up God's church. It's God's church. It's not ours. You know, we don't have our name on it. We are God's. God says we're not even our own. We're bought with a price. Building means what we do for the cause of Christ. As we tell you, so what is, okay, this is real nice talking about building a building. That's really fun, yay. But what does that actually mean for us? It means what we do for the cause of Christ, at least in name. So the things that we're doing in the church, what is it that we really get caught up with? Do we spend our time concerned with things that are going to last into eternity, or things that are temporal? Things that really don't last, that are fleeting? Do we get caught up with our own pet issues? Do we think about what Christ thinks about? And that is people. So things that don't last are things like our own prestige, our own preferences, our own personal agendas. And you don't have to see too many churches to realize this is a very easy thing for us as people, as human beings, to slip into. We start thinking about ourselves, what we want, what we would like to see, and we stop thinking about the people that are around us. And I think that's what God's trying to call our attention back to. Things that last. And by the way, those things, my own personal preferences or agendas or the way that I think things should be, aren't necessarily things that last into eternity. Some of those things just really don't matter. When it goes between that and the souls of men and encouraging somebody else who's just falling apart. So things that last are things like the souls of people, helping one another become more like Christ, caring for one another, caring for somebody else who's hurting and going through something that to them just feels like the end of the earth. Looking out for one another's needs. Those are the kinds of things that impact people for eternity. And those are the kinds of things that are hard enough to spend our time with, much less getting caught up with all these other things. So we build the things that we do here, the things that we do among each other, we are building. Whether we like it or not, we're building. So it's not a question of if we are. Since we are, what are we building with? What are we doing? Is it something that's going to last or something that's not? So we build, but secondly, we build to last. We build something that's going to be durable. If you look in verse 13, Paul is saying our work is going to go through a test. So you kind of get this idea like we're building something. And the word that he uses in verse 14 for building, it doesn't always mean like, just building from the ground up. Sometimes it even meant like an addition. So, we came here long after this church was established and has been going on for a while. And it's sort of like we're building this addition here, and maybe this family's building an addition here. You can kind of imagine this as we look at our spiritual body, as like a building. This is kind of what Paul's trying to paint here. This is the picture. So our work is going to go through a test. And you notice in verses 13, 14, and 15, a couple times he says each one. And when he says that kind of has the idea of individual responsibility. Not kind of, it does. So there is an individual responsibility here that Paul's honing in on, but it's together. So we have our individual responsibility together to build in a right way. Now it's interesting, the purpose of this test, this fire test, is not to destroy. Because you would think, if we built something and someone said, oh yeah, in 5 years we're going to set the place on fire and see how it does, we'd be like, what? That's called arson. That's a felony, right? But it's not that kind of test. It's not like we're trying to destroy the place. We're not trying to destroy anything here. It's a test that really is meant to reveal. In fact, there's 3 words that Paul uses here for reveal. He says, each one's work will become, in verse 13, each one's work will become manifest, that's 1, for the day will disclose it, that's 2, because it will be revealed, 3, by fire. So 3 times in one verse, he uses three words that have basically the same kind of meaning, but with their own little nuances. So he says it's going to become manifest. The idea there is that it makes itself known. And it's a very interesting wordplay there, because it's the idea of you're doing something to yourself. You're making yourself known. To kind of help you with that, it's sort of like Joseph and his brothers, in the Old Testament. So Joseph gets sold into slavery, and you know how God works, and incredible things happen. He becomes second in command. And so then, all the tables turn around. And now Joseph he's the head guy there, and his brothers are coming begging for food, and eventually he lets them know who he is, but not after making them sweat a little bit. But it's always interesting how the Bible just plays up to that. Tension's rising, and then suddenly Joseph says, all right, I can't do this anymore. I'm your brother. And there's this big reveal. That's the idea. You're revealing yourself. It's like somebody at a costume ball or maybe at Halloween, you're like, who's the guy in the bunny mask? I'm kind of freaked out by this. Who is that guy? And so he finally takes off. Oh, that's who it is. It's Jordan. I see. Okay. Or even showing something for what it truly is. One thing I think of is the Wizard of Oz. So you have this big smoke and mirrors kind of thing, and you find out, the little guy's back there with the little levers and such, and it's like, oh, it's just the little guy with levers. It's not really big and scary. So you show it for what it truly is. Maybe even like a kid who's scared of the dark, and no, there's a ghost in the corner. Oh no, you just left your shirt on the chair and it's blowing in the wind. So you reveal something for what it truly is. That's what he says his fire is meant to do. It's going to take what we have done, and it is going to reveal it for what it truly is. That can be a scary thing, or that can be a good thing. It's meant to be a good thing. It's not like, well, we're going to show everyone what you've been up to. That's not even the spirit that you get through this, or you should get through this. It's really like, if you've been doing what's right, it's going to be revealed. It's going to be shown for what it truly is. It's meant to encourage us. The second word it uses is disclose. The day will disclose it. It's meant to inform somebody of something they didn't already know. So, it's like us announcing today that we're expecting. We've known since around Christmas, and it's like, you try so hard not to let it slip, and some people guess, and it's like, that feeling. It's like, I just want to tell everybody, but I can't, just wait, pull off. And then finally it's like, okay, let everybody know. But it's letting people know something perhaps they didn't know before. The third one, to reveal, it's where we get the word apocalypse from. Usually we think apocalypse is like everything going up in flames and being destroyed and that kind of thing. Really, the meaning of the word is to reveal something, like to pull the veil off of something. It's sort of like, if there's and you see this especially in technology. I work at Rosetta Stone, so I work around a fair amount of geeks, and there may be debate as to whether I'm one. I'm probably going to say I'm not. But so you get these software companies that they're going to come out with like a new computer or a new phone or something like that, and their marketing campaigns know just how to work people up into a froth. An absolute froth that people are like camping out in front of the stores, just waiting for this new thing to be revealed, and what can it do? And they're making all these guesses, and I think it's going to do this, I think it's going to be able to do that, I think it's going to make you breakfast in the morning. Whatever, I don't know. And people get ridiculous about this kind of thing. And then finally they pull the veil off, and it's like, until a couple days later, and then it's, what's the next thing? But that's kind of the idea. It's like you're pulling the veil off of something. And that's what this test is meant to do. So everything that we've been doing, again, it could go one way or the other, and that's exactly what Paul's going to say. So it's a test that's designed to pass, not to fail. And that's an important thing, because we read this, and it makes it look like, well, God's just going to take a blowtorch to my life's work and see how it fares? That doesn't seem very loving and kind. But you got to understand that the design for this is, if we've been doing what God wants us to do, we don't have anything to worry about. It's actually going to be a really good thing, because it's sort of like the things that you do that maybe nobody knows about, it's going to be revealed. And that's what he's trying to say. So this test, it's also kind of like a test at school. And unless you have an incredibly sadistic teacher, tests are meant to prove that, okay, these students say that they know world history, so we're going to give them a test to show, yes, I do know world history. Okay, that's the idea of the test. Now, again, there are some sadistic teachers who just get a kick out of seeing people fail, but they're still in the minority. The purpose of a test is to show that the students know what they say they do. And that's what this test is supposed to do. It's not intended to burn, but to show value and durability. What is the day? He talks about the day, and there's all kinds of speculation as to what that is. Really, I'm not going to take too much time with that. I don't think it necessarily matters. It could be the day that Christ returns. It could mean someday, like someday in the future, what you do is going to be put to the test, and it's going to be revealed for what it truly is, whether it's something that matters or something that doesn't. Either way, it's kind of the same result. So do you need to worry about this? Is this something that you need to lay in bed at night, awake, sweating about? If we have lived for what really matters, then we don't have to worry. The test is simply going to prove that. We only need to worry if what we have concerned ourselves with is just the temporal, the kind of senseless stuff that we're really the only one that cares about. And we're not thinking about other people. Then we might have to worry. So there's two test results, obviously, pass, fail. So in verse 14, you get kind of the positive passing test results. A passing result is one that remains. So it says if your work remains, if it's still there after the test is done. If any of you saw last year the Captain America movie, to kind of summarize, you get this scrawny guy, and he wants to join the army, and of course they're not going to pass him because the guy's like skin and bones. And so they have this experimental program to make a super soldier, and they're going to inject him with who knows what, and they're going to make him really strong. But, it could kill you too. Yeah, so let's see what happens. So, that's kind of like one of the favorite parts of the movie where he's in there, and he's going, and they're doing their thing. And so, it really plays up on, well, did he make it? Or, like, is he really strong, or is he dead? I mean, I don't know. And so, that's kind of like the big reveal. And that's sort of the idea here. Of course, he does, like, come out and everything's fabulous, yay. But that's kind of what I picture here. So you got this big, like, test with flames and such, and so you're kind of waiting for the smoke to clear. So, did it make it? Did it still there? That kind of thing. So if your work remains, that's what I picture. He says if your work remains, then there's a reward. Oh, a reward. What is this, like a gift certificate? I mean, what kind of reward are we talking about? And some people really play up on this. Reward, well, let's talk about that. But I think even this being translated as reward kind of put us off in the wrong direction. It's not the idea of us like getting a prize. It's not a science fair. It's more like an experiment where you're trying to see if something's really made of what it's supposed to. The word can mean a reward, but more often it meant wages. And I think that's a more appropriate way to look at this. So if you have put into God's church and you have invested into it properly with the kinds of things that matter to God, then what you're going to get in the end is what you put in. So you build with durable materials, then God says when the heat's on, it's going to stick around. And what you're going to get is what you put in. It's still going to be there. And I think that's more of the result, because he doesn't really talk about what the reward is. If it's a reward like, a prize that you get at Awanas or something like that, he doesn't say what it is. So I think it's more appropriate to look at this as like a wage. And the point simply being, you get out of it what you put in. You can't expect to build with sticks, set it on fire, and expect it to be around. That's just ridiculous, right? Well, that's what he's saying. You can't invest into God's church with things that don't matter and things that are trivial and trite and expect them to stick around. It just doesn't work that way. You invest with things that really matter, they're going to be around years later. It's sort of like the old alchemists trying to put in lead and get out gold. Granted, that would be nice, but none of us would have lead pipes in our houses. We don't need plumbing, we can just have gold, that's fine. You build with flammables, you can kiss it goodbye. But you build durably, it's going to be there. So you live for what matters. You don't live for the inconsequential because nobody's going to remember it years down the road, even a couple of years down the road. So that's the positive, the passive. You build well, you invest into God's church, into the people around you well, then it's going to stick around. I can think of people that have invested into my life. Youth pastors, even just people I knew in the church. And, looking at the things that God's done in my life, and the times that I can go back and tell them, thank you for investing in my life. It changed the direction I could have taken. And I'm sure we could go around the room and talk about people that have invested into your lives. Maybe even people's lives that you have invested into. And seen God do incredible things that are way beyond what you could do. And it's like, that's all God. But that's what we're talking about. You invest in the stuff that matters. And that will be around for years to come. Verse 15, the negative, failing test result. If you fail in what you've done, then it goes up in smoke. But again, this part is up to us. Because we're the ones, God's saying, look, you're the ones that have the choice in how you build and what you build with. Okay, so we can't build the sticks and be like, hey, that's not fair. I wasn't supposed to go up in smokes. I built that with durable, fireproof sticks. Yeah. Well, that was still our choice. So what's the loss? He says that we're going to suffer loss. Basically, it means to receive any kind of damages. Obviously, if what you do is forgotten, that's kind of a loss. And that's where you get to the end of your life with regrets. And in crisis, like, what has my life been about? And if you've lived your life and if you have invested in God's church, it's just stuff that just doesn't matter. And you can see yourself, getting towards the end of life and being like, what was this all about? Yeah, great. So I just made money and went home and, didn't really think about anyone else, and now what? But if you live to invest in other people, sure, there's times that you feel like, oh man, what was this all about? There's times, but overall, you could look back on your life and be like, you know what? It wasn't a perfect life, because I'm not a perfect person. Man, it was worth it. Because look at what God did. Look at what God used me to do. It's amazing. The building burns, but not the builder. And it's interesting because in some interpretations, verse 15 has been taken to prove a doctrine of purgatory. It talks about, you're going through the fire, but you're going to be saved through the fire, so this is like a purgatory kind of thing, right? No, it's not that. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. It's not a theology of purgatory. It's saying that the builder is not going to be purged by the flames. It's just saying this isn't the kind of flame that's going to burn you up. This is testing what you have done. Because you can understand how this would be, if you were a Corinthian reading this, it's like, whoa, flames? Are we talking about hell here? What's going on? And I think Paul's trying to make it clear here. No, we're not talking about that. Jesus Christ, he said, you will be with me, you will be with him. We're not talking about that. So I think it is important to clarify that. Paul doesn't say what exactly the fire is. And that's one question that I always had in my mind. So what is this fire? How do we know what the fire is? Is this something that happens in eternity? Like when we see Christ? Are we evaluated? Or is this something that happens through life? When life turns the heat on. Myself, I'm more inclined to interpret the latter. That this is something that we could, sure, it could be in eternity, but I think it's also something that happens through life. Sometimes what we do, even in the church, life puts the heat on, right? We've all experienced that. And it can get pretty hot. It can get pretty sticky. And we wonder if we're going to survive it. But God is saying here that heat that life brings is going to reveal truth. Truth about what we have done, what we have invested in. So, bringing all this together, what do you spend your time doing? Specifically, as we look at this, specifically in the church. What do we spend our time doing? Do we concern ourselves with stuff that only matters to me? Or do we concern ourselves with the people around us, the people that God has brought into our lives to impact for Him? Do you think about others and what they're going through and how you can be the hand and heart of God to them? Or is it just about what I've got on my mind today, right now? Because that's the stuff that will not matter. I mean, you think about 10, 15 years down the road. The people that you have actually impacted, people that you have led to Christ, people that you have encouraged in the Lord, people that you have been there and held their hand when their life is just falling apart. Those things are going to last, and they're going to remember you into eternity. But like the things that you have just taken on as your pet peeve or your pet project or your whatever, that's just you, and maybe trample on people to get that. How long does that last? How long do people remember that? Not long at all. It does not last. Maybe another thing to think about, why do you come to church? I mean, do we come? Yes, we all come to worship. We all come for that, but there should be more. God wants more. He wants to give us more. The joy of giving ourselves to others. We should gather to serve God by serving one another. It's not like we're supposed to just come here and sit and sing, get up and go. God's got more. He's got a reason for why He's put you in this body, each person. Maybe you said, well, I can't do this, can't do that, can't do that. I don't know. I'm just not really that type. Well, God's got something for you. I mean, that's why He describes the church as also as a body. You know, there's how many different parts are there to a body? Fingers and toes and eyes and ears and everything. And in Ephesians, he talks about this body. He said, you know what makes this body work? What makes the finger work in conjunction with the toes? He said it's all those ligaments, it's all those joints. In other words, all the connections, the places where one piece touches another. That's the way a church is, where each one of us touch one another. That's what gives the power to a church. That's what makes us work together. When you talk to people, are you trying to get to know them, or are you trying to push an agenda? Here's a way to think of it. Do we use stuff to reach people, or do we use people to get stuff, or maybe even get stuff done? Let me say that again. Do we use stuff to reach people, or do we use people to get stuff done? For me, that's been convicting. Sometimes I've just got stuff on my mind. And I come to church, and I feel like I go through the whole service, and I'm thinking about this, and this, and this, and this, and it's like, how many people did I touch? Really? And how many people did I actually get to have a conversation with, much less talk about spiritual things, much less know where they are with the Lord? And reading through 1 Corinthians 3, 11 to 15, I wonder how much stuff that I do, when it comes to, if it was to be tested with this kind of flame, what would be standing? I mean, would I just be looking at the basement and the foundation? Or would there actually be something to look at? As we close today, I just want you to meditate on this, to think about what it is that you are investing in God's church here. Because someday the heat's going to be on. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but the heat's going to be on, and the truth will be revealed. I mean, truth has a way of rising to the surface, doesn't it? So, God says, invest smart. Build to last. Build one another up in a way that is going to last, even beyond the years that you are on this earth. That's the way that God wants us